Hi, today we will be discussing the steps taken towards our customer discovery. Starting with Step 7, Identifying Customer Segment. In this segment, we will be dividing potential customers into groups based off of shared characteristics. When creating a customer segment, you must first ask 4 important questions. Are you a member of this group? Do you have a passion for this group? Is the customer segment large and growing? And do you have regular contact with this group? Using the questions from Step 7, I have identified 3 appropriate customer segments, as well as listed their unmet needs. This will take us into Step 8, our unmet market needs. Starting off, our first segment will be people of color. Their unmet market needs tend to be finding options that meet their needs, diverse brands are usually expensive, as well as not feeling represented in marketing. In this segment, we chose to focus on a specific problem. We felt their biggest problem was finding inexpensive brands that were inclusive in their product selection. Following up, our next segment would be women. We felt their most unmet needs were hard to find options that met all their needs, the market is not inclusive, and usually women's clothing tends to be expensive. We felt women's biggest problem was finding inexpensive items catered and marketed inclusively. And finally, the last segment we selected was Muslim women. Muslim women tend to struggle with finding modest but fashionable clothing. Research also showed that when they did find modest clothing, it was usually very expensive. The next major problem they had was they could not eat everywhere, seeing the fact that they only eat halal food. It seemed their problem of focus was finding inexpensive and accessible modest clothing. This brings us to our next step, Step 9, Identifying Early Adopters. In this step, we will be identifying the early adopters and their behaviors for the customer segment we selected from the previous list. After careful thought, we decided that the best segment was people of color. We did this by answering the questions from Step 7. I myself am a person of color, and because of this, I tend to struggle with these exact problems. This leads me to be very passionate about this topic. Being a person of color, I do have regular contact with other people of color. There is a large number of people of color in Canada, and it is continuing to grow. After answering all these questions, it was very clear that this was the best option to proceed with. Our next step was finding early adopters. An early adopter is usually the first person who starts using a product or technology as soon as it becomes available. To find early adopters, we will need to break down all potential customers and their behaviors. We started off by focusing on 3 potential customers: early adopters, the early majority, and late majority. Early adopters tend to spend money on higher-end items that cater to all their needs. They also spend excessive money to make lower-end products work. While the early majority struggles to find things they need, so they use what's available to them. And lastly, the late majority. They are usually unaware that they have a problem, so they shop normally assuming it's normal to work hard to find what they need. They tend to stick to whatever products are available to them. Next is Step 10, Early Adopters. In this step, we will be finding out what channels are best for reaching the customers in the segment we selected. Finding channels. Channels and offline channels. Online channels tend to be anything accessed online or via the internet. Our online channels that we found were Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and blogs and articles, whereas offline channels are usually face-to-face. The offline channels we discovered were magazines, ethnic stores, billboards, ethnic festivals such as Afrofest, and mall booths or stands. We then researched what channels our competitors were using. We discovered they mainly used Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, exclusive websites, and department stores. After going through interviews, we discovered that the best channels to use were Instagram, YouTube, blogs, conferences, and Twitter. We wanted to see where our customers were exchanging information and advice, so we searched for online forums and groups. These were the best ones. The list is as follows: 7 Cups, alsc.com, which is a discussion page for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Next is Lost Queens, Black Bloggers United, and the Sister Circle. Using a beachhead. When trying to tackle a market, it is best to start with a small portion of it described as a niche. In this step, you will find the beachhead market we plan on starting with. The following questions are what you should ask yourself when this market buy similar products. Do the customers in this niche market have similar sales cycles? And do they have word of mouth? Possible options for our beachhead would be women of color, men of color, and students of color. I felt that women of color were the best option. The reason for this is simply because in the following elements: currency, access, size, growth, passion, active, and virality. Lastly, is step customer discovery script. The point of our customer discovery script is to confirm assumptions you have already made about your potential customers. This is done by asking them open-ended questions, allowing them to give you brutally honest answers to confirm you are headed in the right direction. Starting off with by thanking them for their time, introducing myself personally, and then introducing the purpose of bringing them in and why their help is needed. Next, you want to end their introduction by letting them know that they can be brutally honest and let go of their polite nature. This list of 9 questions I felt were best suited for my segment. Number 1, how would you describe yourself as a woman of color? 2, how would you describe a satisfactory shopping experience? 3, what is your biggest problem while shopping as a person of color? 4, why is it a problem for you? 5, when was the last time you tried to solve the problem? 6, how did or do you solve it? 7, how did you find your current solution? 8, what isn't ideal about it? And lastly, 9, you want to ask permission if you can follow up with them in the future and ask them for their best contact information. Finally, to your time and remind them you may want to follow up for future inquiries.